We're going to hear a special piano piece now by Adrian Koppejan, son of Brother Adrian. After that, the children of Brother Adrian, Saskia, Ada, Miriam, and Marcel will come and read the eulogy. First, the piano piece.
So before I share the piano piece, I wanted to talk a little bit about my dad's love for music. And that was the Toccata and Fuge in D minor by J.S. Bach. And I just want you to imagine a Sunday afternoon coming home from church. And my dad would turn that song on and crank it in the living room. And things would be rumbling because of the bass that would be kicking in. And I want to thank you for coming here today to this memorial service. And we wanted to start with sharing about my dad's love for music. He made beautiful organs that were impressive to look at and beautiful to listen to. But there was more to that as well. You know, many people thought that my dad actually could play the organ, and he was able to fool many a person. But there was really only one chord progression that my dad could play on the organ. And the way that he made it sound better was he would just add more stops each time he played it. And there was one time when my dad was demonstrating an organ with a potential customer, and my brother Marcel was standing there loitering. And after he finished playing his chord progression, Marcel piped up and asked if he could play another song for the customer. But my dad quickly dismissed that idea and said he didn't have time for that, and then started to talk about the intricacies of the tracker pipe organ. Since my dad really couldn't play an instrument, it was all very important that his kids could play the piano. But it was always his dream that one of us would play the organ. Now, Miriam, my sister Miriam, she did not like playing the piano. But he would not let her quit. So they made a deal. And the deal was this: Miriam would play the pipe organ for 1 year, and if she didn't like playing the organ, then she wouldn't have to play the organ or the piano anymore. And I think that secretly my dad was hoping that Miriam would fall in love with the pipe organ, but unfortunately that did not happen. After that year, Miriam not only hung up her organ shoes, which she did not like, but also the piano books were put away as well. And I think my dad was quite happy that I took piano the furthest in the family, and every time company would come over for coffee, as we would say, he would ask that I'd play the piano. And as a teenage boy, that was always a bit of an embarrassing feat to do. And I tried to come up with excuses, but my dad was always very persistent. But I knew that he always had great pride for me when he listened to me playing the piano. I'm almost done here. You know, music was such a big part of my dad's life, and whether it was him showcasing his latest organ, him listening to this organ music on his stereo, I will always be forever grateful for his gift of music to the world. And this short song I'm playing is a prelude by Chopin, which is known as the Funeral's March.
All right, we'll try to put 86 years into 5 minutes. It's not going to be easy. Our dad was born in 1936 in Holland to Sarah and Marinus Koppejan. He was given only one name, no middle name, and he was the fifth of 8 children. He had a sister who was paralyzed from the neck down and couldn't speak and was looked after by his mother at home until she died in her early 50s. So Dad always had a soft spot for handicapped people. He would often mention his brother Dries, who was 2 years older than him, and who had died at 18 years old from a ruptured appendix. So heaven help us if we ever had a stomachache.
Our dad loved to share stories from his early years during World War II. Even though he was only 4 years old when the war broke out until about 9, he remembered a lot of events during those 5 years. He learned to be content with little. He remembered the struggle for food and the hunger looking in the back of German army trucks for leftover bread, which was very risky. If a soldier would have caught him, he could have been shot. He also remembers how cold the winters were and going into the forest as young boys with his brothers to cut down trees and branches, but they had to be on high alert because the police were looking for illegal wood cutting. If police were spotted, they had to quickly throw the wood into the ditch to avoid getting caught. One time there was an air fight right above their heads and they dove in a ditch. They were really scared that they'd be hit by stray bullets, but the Lord protected them.
In Holland, it was mandatory at 18 to serve in the military for 2 years. Our dad was part of the military police. He loved to mention this. He was very proud of doing that. It was often a joke between Paul and him, who had the more important job in the army. While working on an organ in The Hague, our dad met our mom. They didn't live in the same city, and my dad was away a lot for work, sometimes months at a time, so they wrote lots of letters. And when he was home, he would have to take the train to see her, and sometimes he would go by moped, traveling 3-4 hours from his town to The Hague. They dated for 5 years, and then they got married in 1965, and they just celebrated 58 years together a few months ago.
So 1 year and 1 day after they were married, they had their first child, Saskia. This was always nice for us kids, as it made it very easy to remember their anniversary. 2.5 years later, Miriam was born, and 2 years after that, me. After Mom's brother, Rochus visited Canada, my mom and dad visited Canada too and loved it so much they decided to move. 3 years later, they had their first son, Andrew, on April Fool's, and when Dad called us to let us know that we had a brother, we first thought it was a joke. 15 months later, they had another boy, Marcel, and the family was complete. My dad worked hard and was away from home for weeks at a time, but when he was home, he always made sure that we did fun family activities on the weekends, like skating, skiing, Harrison Hot Springs, and Cultus Lake, etc. When we first got to Canada, we went on an outing to a drive-thru for an ice cream. As kids, we were excited, but Dad asked for 5 ice, which is Dutch, but it didn't quite translate into English. So the girl there didn't understand, and we didn't get the ice cream, so that was kind of disappointing.
For his dad's work, he apprenticed with his father for many years as a pipe organ builder and did some more training in Germany. Moving to Canada in 1974, he started working in construction, and after a few years, returned to his trade starting Koppejan pipe organs on Yale Road, and many of you may remember seeing or driving past the sign. And there was a poster in his office that said, "If you work with your hands, you're a laborer. If you work with your hands and your head, you're a craftsman. If you work with your hands and your head and your heart, you're an artist." My dad was an artist. He repaired and rebuilt organs, as well as building many more organs in his own design. He took pride in the quality of his craftsmanship and was pleased to be able to say that he never had to go back to any churches to repair things after he installed the organs. He was often gone 4 to 6 weeks at a time on tuning trips or to set up new organs. Even on our last family get-together for Father's Day, we were looking at his organ pictures, and he remembered where every organ was and what years they were built. And this is kind of a funny little side story. When the care aides came to work or to help my dad, and they asked him what he did for a job, then he's like, "Well, he worked." And we're like, "Well, what kind of work?" "Oh, he worked hard." "Okay, well, what did you do?" And then he said, "Built pipe organs." And they go, "Oh, you worked on the pipeline?" So we're like, no, it was not the pipeline. Spending time together as a family was important to our dad. Every summer, we went camping with the family, to the Okanagan, to the Rockies, Yellowstone, Disneyland, the Oregon coast, and Vancouver Island. The first time we went skiing in 1979, we were very naive and didn't wear proper ski pants, so we got very wet. After skiing got to be too tiring, they switched to snowshoeing. They enjoyed biking, doing lots of bike trips to Vancouver Island, to Kettle Valley, and Whistler. And they also did some bike tours in Europe. Mom and Dad enjoyed lots of hiking. One time they used an old hiking book and hiked up the wrong side of Sumas Mountain, so they needed search and rescue to help them find their way down. Dad was in great shape, still hiking Frosty Mountain just 2 years ago. With all his activities, he loved most of all to soak in the sun.
Mom and Dad traveled to a few countries over the years. It all started in 1984 when they went on their first vacation that wasn't Holland or camping. They got a cheap deal to go to Hawaii, but it was disappointing. 4 years later, they tried again, this time going on their first cruise to Mexico. They were not super impressed, but they liked it enough that they went again, and somehow they went on 15 cruises. In 1998, I and Ian and Connor joined my mom and dad to Mazatlan, Mexico, and that's when they bought a timeshare. So now they had to go to Mexico every November. They got the travel bug when they started adding trips to other European countries after visiting family in Holland. They started looking for any sale or an excuse to go to the next place, even if they used their kids as an excuse. They had to visit Ada when she was in Japan and Australia, and they had to visit Marcel when he was working in Liberia. But there was a limit. They weren't going to Pakistan. They went on several mission trips to Haiti, Mexico, Bolivia, and Peru. Of course, they had to add a 4-day hike or four-day hike to Machu Picchu at the end of that. Dad was 76 when he did that. After each trip, we would have a family get-together. And as they're sharing stories, they would inevitably say the phrase, "by the way," and it basically announced their next vacation destination, which they already had booked already. They went on a 2-week South American cruise with the Van Vliets. Before the ship left Chile, they had a few days to explore. They went for a nice cup of coffee, and 30 minutes later, when they came back to their car, they found their windows smashed and all their luggage stolen. So they had only 1 day to quickly shop for dressy clothes, casual clothes, shoes, toiletries, etc. for their 2-week cruise. All in all, they traveled to 55 countries. Not bad.
Looking back, we realize what a rich life my dad had, traveling and spending quality time with his family. As we looked through photos to make the slideshow, it was hard to find photos of him with the grandkids, as he was mostly the one taking photos, not being in them. Since my dad's diagnosis of cancer 2 years ago, we realized how precious our time with him was, so we made sure to get together every week. We'd have dinner and then we'd play card games. And even up to a few weeks ago, we were still playing games. I'm grateful that I was able to help care for him at the end so he was able to stay at home and not have to go to the hospital or hospice. It was his wish that he could die at home, and we are so grateful that we were able to witness his last moments, that he went peacefully. To God be the glory.
Good afternoon. My name is Marcel. I'm the youngest born of the Koppejans. I'd like to give a little eulogy, but before we do, I'd like to pray for just a minute. Creator God, thank you so much for life and that we're here in this moment, that we get to breathe in this air, and we get to remember my dad, our friend, and thank you for the life that he lived. Guide us now in truth and beauty and the goodness as we seek you. Amen. This is being live streamed from what I know, so I just want to say a little shout out to the people in Holland. Groetjes from Canada, and we zijn blij dat je bent met ons in onze harten. That's the best Dutch I could pull off in the minute. So anyway, just wanted to say a few things. I wanted to share with you a little bit of a different side of my dad, maybe, and share with you what we called typisch at. So typisch is Dutch for typical or standard, and at is short for Adrian or Adrian. And so let's start with organ building, shall we? So my dad, he was an organ builder, as you know, and played a nice song, and he would build these incredible instruments that would take sometimes a couple of years. And he would build these instruments, but he would also try to build up his children and instill values and character, or karakter, in us. And as kids, we were not always the most advanced in terms of our helping skills, let's say, and it was quite funny because he'd be up in the organ, up in the wind chest with the pipes, and it'd be hot, and it'd be difficult to work because it'd be loud, and the pipes would be going, and he could barely hear what's going on down below, and we'd be down at the keyboard, and it was a little bit boring because all we would do is hold down some notes, and so he would give us commands. It was in Dutch. He would tune an organ by saying fourths, fifths, and octaves. And in Dutch, it would be kwart, which is a fourth, quint, which is a fifth, and octave, which is an octave. And so, us studious children that each went through this experience, we held down the notes. And one time, I remember being in a church, it was actually in Chilliwack here, and I was in the best part of the book. The characters had developed, the plot was thickening, it was amazing. I was lost in the book, and then I heard this voice from up above saying, "Kwart, kwart, wat doe je, jongen? Hey, kwart!" And I was just basically like, what are you doing? What am I paying you for? Anyway, it was a little teepee zut moment right there. As you know, my parents love to travel. They love to explore. They like to show us kids things. And so one time we were camping. They introduced us to camping. So it was great. We got introduced to nature. And anyway, one time we were actually down in the States, and we went out to this restaurant and decided to eat out one time. So anyway, I was 12, brother was 13, and there was this waitress who was gorgeous. Now, my dad picks up on my big eyes looking at the waitress, and so he calls the waitress over and says, I can't do a Dutch accent, it comes out Russian, but my dad would basically say, "Excuse me, my son, he finds you very beautiful, and he just wanted you to know." And they couldn't see where I was because I had slipped underneath the table and waiting for the storm and the moment to pass. So that's teepee zut right there. They also took us skiing and introduced us to skiing. Now skiing was fun, but it was also a little bit dangerous because what would happen was my dad, he was in control, a little in control, but he was more out of control than in control. And he would ski like he was coming out of the 1960s or 70s, like a bit James Bond. He would be on a bit of an angle, back like this, and he would just ski like he didn't really mind and didn't care. And so we would stop, we would be skiing together as a family, we'd stop halfway down, and we'd look, and my dad would be skiing in behind us, and we'd wait for him to come, and it would just be a moment of, a little bit anxious, a moment, a bit nervous. Who's he going to hit this time? Is it going to be me or my sister this time? And sure enough, there would be a poof of powdery snow, and my dad would stand back up and shake himself off and say, "What are you guys looking at? No problem." And anyway, there comes the Russian accent again. Anyway, one time we were skiing at Silver Star, and one of these things happened. Then I get down to the lift line, right? And I said, "Dad, did you hurt yourself when you had that little wipeout up there with the family?" He's like, No, I'm okay. And I said, "Well, I think you're bleeding." And sure enough, his goggles were broken and there was blood coming down his face. But he just put, he always had a handkerchief with him, a sakdoek, as you know. And he had a handkerchief, and he just basically dabbed the blood, and we kept skiing the rest of the day as if nothing had happened. That was teepee zut. And anyway, one other little story about traveling. This shows kind of the character of my parents and my dad in particular here, is that I had gone to South Africa. So the roles were reversed here a little bit. They heard about my stories and saw the pictures, and they thought, this beautiful trip, Marcel, wonderful. And they were really into the stories. So as a joke, I just said, "Well, hey, if you guys want to pay, I'll be your tour guide," as a funny thing to say. And a few months later, we were traveling around South Africa, and I was showing them Drakensberg Mountains and the Garden Route and some other places, and it was wonderful memories. So, teepee's ut. So, as many of you here know, the Dutch, they like order. They're not big fans of chaos. They like things in order, and so my dad also enjoyed order. Even in the point of his death, he died on June 23rd, 2023 at 2:30 p.m. So he enjoyed being timely, but he was just shy of coffee time. Now you see, growing up, coffee time was, it was by the clock. You could tell what time it was. 10 o'clock, coffee time. Oh, my dad's drinking coffee. Must be 3 o'clock. 8 o'clock, coffee time. And there's only one way he liked the coffee, static. which means strong. So back in South Africa, we were traveling around on the garden route. We were stopped at this little village, this little town. 10 o'clock, what are we doing? Coffee. So my parents are in the car. My dad had sent me ahead into the coffee shop to do a reconnaissance mission to find out what's the quality of this machine. You know, what's the quality of the coffee? What's the vibe of the place in there? Because he wanted to make sure that it was going to be sterk coffee. None of this, as they say in Dutch, slappe slootwater, which basically means weak water from the canal, you know? Nobody wants canal water. That's TP Zat. So, yeah, I just want to say one last thing here is he had a typical thing that he would say, and none of us could figure out why over the years that he said it. So you get together as family for dinner. Could be camping, could be at home, it could be wherever, and the noise level would rise over time. Jokes and discussions, and the noise level would creep up, right? And then at some point, my dad would say, and he'd raise his hands because he loved to talk with his hands, and he'd go like this. And he'd say, kalm, jongen, still. De buren kan je horen, which means the neighbors can hear you. You know, be quiet, quiet, guys, the neighbors can hear. We never figured out exactly why he said that, but it became kind of like a joke, or, you know, before the time, it became a meme in our family. And anyway, on the last day of his life, I was talking with my sister. I was at my parents' house, and there was a pipe that was hanging on the wall that he had framed in as a memento of his work. And we took the pipe down, and we blew that pipe as loud as we could. I don't know what the note was. He could have told us, but we blew it as loud as we could, and the neighbors might have heard. It was loud enough that the neighbors could hear, but somehow I think in that moment he wouldn't have minded. You know, and I don't think he did. I think he was somehow proud of us giving a final salute. So I leave you with a song. It's a favorite song of mine. It's called The Traveler's Song. And it says, if you travel here, you will feel it all, the brightest and the darkest. If you travel here, listen to your heart and take with you what lasts forever. One more time here. If you travel here, you will feel it all, the brightest and the darkest. And if you travel here, listen to your heart and take with you what lasts forever. So just want to say thank you so much for celebrating our dad's life with us today.